more time with us this afternoon to participate in our discussion about Title IX and student safety here on campus. In order for us to do that, first, we just want to let everyone introduce themselves, and then we will get started with our presentation, which is from an organization from Juliet and Amy called Harassment Free North Carolina. So I will let folks introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim DeCristo. I'm Chief of Staff for the university, and I've been here for 19 years.
I'm Laurel Donnelly. I'm the Vice Provost for Student Affairs, and I met many of you earlier this morning, and I have been here at UNCSA for 10 years and in this role for almost a year.
Hey folks, welcome again. Martin Farrell, High School Academics, and I've been here 7.5 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrice Goldman. I'm Associate General Counsel. I'll be filling in for Miss Valerie Thielen, who is our Title IX coordinator.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Nick Golick. I am the Director for Student Conduct and Community Standards, and I've been at UNCSA for a little over 8 years now.
Okay, and my name is Tammy Ford. I am the Assistant Dean of High School Life. I have been with the university for 3 years and in my current role for a little over 7 months. And so I will let Juliet and Amy get started and have some discussion with you about our campus safety and Title IX. Ladies, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Tammy. Thanks everyone for the introduction. I am going to share my screen quick. Oops. Of course, we just practiced it now. My screen is, there we go. Thank you. Hopefully you can all see that now. Great. Well, I am happy to be here with you today. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Juliet Grimmett, who you'll meet in just a few minutes. Juliet and I share a joint project, as Tammy mentioned, Harassment Free NC, where we work with schools to prevent and address sexual misconduct. We've been working with School of the Arts for a few years now, and we're consistently impressed with the initiative that faculty, staff, and students are taking to create safer spaces. Juliet and I both have teenage children too, so we're at a time in our lives where we can really empathize with some of what you all as parents and caregivers are facing. Just a little bit more about me. I'm a lawyer by training, but I don't practice. I've dedicated my career to using the law as a foundation in supporting organizations and schools create structures to enhance equity and reduce discrimination and harassment. I have over 20 years of experience in this area, and I have served in the roles of Equal Opportunity Officer, Title IX Coordinator, Chief Diversity Officer, among others. I own 7 and 9, a consulting business focused on these topics. And as I mentioned, Harassment Free NC is a joint project with Juliet and her organization, Chrysalis Network, as we focus on sexual harassment specifically. So you've heard a little bit from staff at School of the Arts on why we're here today. And just to reiterate, I think that we're really here to collaborate and contribute together to create an environment, an academic environment, and a living environment where students are safe and flourishing. The most effective way to do this is when students, parents, faculty, and staff and caregivers are all working together. So during our time together this afternoon, Juliet and I plan to offer an overview on a few things. One, the work that we're doing to support School of the Arts in preventing and addressing any form of sexual misconduct. Also, a little bit of background on relevant laws like Title IX and related policies, as well as how you can collaboratively work with School of the Arts to best keep students safe. So when thinking about what's driving these efforts, School of the Arts is intrinsically committed to creating a space where students can thrive and are free from experiencing any inappropriate conduct. I've seen this commitment in several areas in working with School of the Arts. I've seen it in regulations like this one that's on the screen. I've seen it in strategic planning processes, in working with our organizations to broaden awareness and enhance their systems. And I've also seen it in the School of the Arts community showing up to learn and to talk about how to create welcoming and respectful spaces. We've got great turnout at all of our training sessions and workshops, and it's really just refreshing to see. Another driving force is School of the Arts' legal obligations under Title IX. Title IX is a law from 1972 that states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. I do want to note that on the basis of sex not only includes biological sex or sex assigned at birth, but also one's gender identity, sexual orientation, includes discrimination from any sex-based stereotypes or pregnancy-related condition. Well, I should also mention to you real quick, when I'm talking about what the basis of sex means, any sex can also discriminate against any other sex. So historically, sometimes we think about men being in a position of power discriminating against women, but really under the definitions in Title IX, any sex can discriminate against any other sex as long as it meets certain criteria. So men can discriminate against men, women against men, any gender identity against any other gender identity. So Title IX is equally applicable to all folks. And for many of us, especially with those of us who have high school age children, we might remember Title IX as being about athletics and equity between men's and women's sports teams. But Title IX is much broader, including all education programs and activities. So this includes academics, arts programs, school-sponsored extracurriculars, residence life, among many other things. As is the case with many laws, interpretation of Title IX is evolving over time. And in the past decade, there's been a lot of guidance and rules from the government about how schools should be preventing and addressing sexual misconduct under Title IX. At the end of the day, we want you and your students to know that they should not be mistreated as members of the School of the Arts community because of their sex or gender identity, sexual orientation, pregnancy status, any of those things. Detailed information is available on School of the Arts website, but I wanted to offer an overview of the types of behaviors that I'm referring to when I say the term sexual misconduct. School of the Arts has a regulation that really mirrors Title IX. School of the Arts is a tiny bit broader, which is common for a higher ed institution. Both Title IX and School of the Arts regulation prohibit discrimination, harassment in a variety of forms, including sexual assault, and also retaliation. And I'll be specifically teaching your 9th and 11th graders about these terms and their rights in an age-appropriate way. I like to use brief clips from popular TV shows to discuss scenarios, and we can work through and discuss those together. It works out pretty well. Something that I would like you to know is not the ins and outs of everything within Title IX, but I think it is helpful to know that if an issue comes up, if a student feels that they have been mistreated in a way that was on that previous slide, if they feel they've been discriminated against or sexually harassed, there are several things that School of the Arts is required to do. One thing is that School of the Arts has to take prompt and effective action, not only to address the conduct, but prevent its recurrence and also remedy any effects of that conduct. So quickly act and quickly make sure that students are feeling safe and that issues are being addressed. The institution also has to offer supportive measures to the party or parties who are impacted by the conduct. So for instance, let's say a student is feeling uncomfortable because of some comments another student in class made or felt that they had been treated inappropriately related to their sex. Some supportive measures could include, it's very context specific, but maybe it's a no contact order between the students, or maybe there's assignment of a different section of a class so that the students can be separated while the resolution is happening, just to mitigate any discomfort that students might be feeling in the moment. And then lastly, the school has to implement a fair, transparent, and reliable process for the resolution of a concern. And School of the Arts does have a thorough, compliant grievance procedure resolution process that is publicly available on the website if you have questions or want to look at that in more detail. I've mentioned this website a couple of times. There's a ton of information on here. There's information on what to do if you've experienced some form of sexual misconduct, information on what to do if you want to support, a friend or your student, even what to do if you're accused of conduct. So lots of stuff out there for you to take a look at and to access if you need it. There are emergency and community resources listed. So in addition to the Title IX officer, she couldn't be here today, but Valerie Thielen is the woman that whose name was mentioned earlier. Your new position of confidential advocate is available at School of the Arts, Fulton McSwain, lots of other staff resources, including the folks who are on this call today. I know that this is something that nobody wants or likes to think about. And our sincere hope is that you never need any of this information, but it is important to know that it exists and that you and your student have abundant resources available to you if needed. I kind of want to boil this down because at the end of the day, no one expects parents and caregivers or their students to know the exact definitions of the terms that I'm offering and how all the procedures work in detail. What is the most important thing to remember is that if your child experiences conduct that is unwelcome, that makes them feel uncomfortable, and it's related to their sex or sexual orientation or gender identity, there's a process in place to address that concern. School of the Arts is responsible for addressing that concern. And I'm making sure your students know this and know their rights as well. I'd like to tell you that at School of the Arts, all employees are mandatory reporters, which means that if a faculty or a staff person knows of a potential issue of sexual misconduct, they're required to report that issue to the Title IX officer. There are a few exceptions. There's a handful of confidential resources, such as professional counselors and your confidential advocate that I mentioned just a minute ago. Community resources external to School of the Arts are also available and can be confidential. I think if you haven't met a lot of these folks already, you're going to be meeting them soon. Your students will definitely be meeting all of them soon. Please know that mandatory reporters are also receiving training from Harassment Free NC on how to respond to a student's disclosure of sexual misconduct, both from a compassionate and trauma-informed lens and also from a procedural standpoint. If an issue comes up, your student should expect, attention and response to that concern, compassion, connection to appropriate resources, and also advocacy for the just resolution of their concern. I'm talking with your students about mandatory reporting also and the differences between confidentiality and privacy to make sure that they understand where to get the resources that are most appropriate for their particular set of circumstances, should something come up. Again, I hope this is not an issue for any of you, but should you find your family in a situation where a report has been filed involving your student, it's really good to know what to expect. So if something comes up, first know that immediate safety concerns are addressed right away. That's first and foremost priority to make sure that students are safe on campus. I've seen this in action with the campus police, with the Title IX coordinator, with the high school staff, all working together and doing a great job to protect students. It's also something to know that the Title IX coordinator is going to quickly reach out to the party who is reporting any type of concern. Talk to that student about what their resources are, talk to that student about what their options are in terms of moving that concern through a resolution process. So that's something that will happen very quickly. You can also expect that students will be treated equitably. Whether your student is a reporting party or whether your student is a responding party in a situation, that student is going to be treated equitably as is required by Title IX. No consequences, no determination, no nothing is going to happen without a thorough look into what the concern is and opportunities from all sides and all parties to share their side of the story. I also want to mention, and this comes back to when I was a Title IX coordinator, it's so important to know that investigations can take time. A lot of times folks are really wanting resolution immediately, and it takes a lot of time to conduct an investigation and making sure you get all the information and do the analysis that you need to do. So it can take a couple of weeks, up to a few weeks sometimes to get those investigations done. So please, know that it's not anybody dilly-dallying, it just getting the right folks lined up and being able to meet with everybody, unfortunately, sometimes takes longer than we wish it would. I also want to share that information is provided on a need-to-know basis. So in order to protect the privacy of folks involved and to protect integrity in the investigation, only folks who are needed to either help with the resolution or help support the student are going to be informed about elements of this process. There are lots of privacy restrictions and confidentiality laws in place. And so not a lot of information can be shared sometimes while an investigation is happening or a resolution process is underway. This is also true for specifics about the outcome. So let's say, again, hopefully it would never happen, but your student files a report about feeling mistreated because of their sex. You may not ever be informed about what the outcome is for that responding party because that's their private confidential information. You would be informed about anything that had relationship to your student and make sure that you know that your student feels safe and protected moving forward. But it's tricky because you want to have the community trust you, but there also are restrictions on what can and should be shared during any type of resolution process. I know that this is hard as a parent. I know this is really hard. We instinctually really want to protect our kids. So sometimes something scary might be happening on campus or you heard about something. It's really natural and understandable to want as much information as possible. I can tell you that in my workshops and in talking with a lot of staff at School of the Arts, there can be frustration sometimes about rumors spreading once a report is in a Title IX process because only so much information can be shared. Minds get a little creative and start to go in a lot of different directions. And the rumors can be pretty destructive, but the staff can't really put an end to some of those rumors because they're really restricted by confidentiality laws and privacy restrictions. So one way to address this is reaching out to staff directly. The folks on this call, you can get answers to your questions to the extent that they're able. So that brings me to my last point up here is you should expect answers to questions to the extent possible. They may not be able to share details of a case with you, but you could call the Title IX officer or you could call somebody in student life and say, hey, I'm really concerned about what I overheard. Could you help me understand a little bit better? And they can share with you what they can and hopefully resolve some of your concerns or quell any rumors about a situation. Working with School of the Arts staff, and they are wonderful people. They want you to know that they're approachable, they're caring, they're trustworthy, and they're as transparent as they possibly can be. I'll say that in return, it's tremendously helpful, and I've seen this too in my different roles on campuses. It's so helpful in doing their jobs. If you have any concerns or questions about sexual misconduct on campus, please reach out to the folks on this call. As I'm saying, this is a ripe area for rumors and that can be destructive. Staff members really welcome an opportunity to speak with you directly about any concern to the extent that they can. Here are a couple of important resources available to you and your students. I'll be sharing this with your students as well if they've got questions. Let's see, you have on the left side, if you think that your student is involved or has an issue related to sexual misconduct personally, some of the suggestions I would have you reach out to first would be Valerie Thielen, the Title IX coordinator at School of the Arts. Also police and public safety. If there's any concern about physical safety, never hesitate to reach out. And then I had mentioned the relatively new position that School of the Arts has, which is wonderful to have. It's a confidential advocate, a coordinator for gender violence and survivor advocacy, and that person is Fulton McSwain. If you have concerns about rumors or other students' conduct, just kind of something going on, please don't hesitate to reach out to the community coordinators. Tammy Ford, who introduced us, is also a fantastic resource. And Tammy, forgive me if I heard you say you were in a newish position, so I might not have updated your title as quickly as I should have, but excellent resources in Tammy and everybody else here on the call. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Juliet Grimmett to continue sharing about information that we're providing to your students. She's also going to offer some great suggestions about how parents can best work with School of the Arts and keeping students safe. Thanks so much, and here's Juliet. I'm going to close the sharing of my screen so that she can share hers.
Thank you. And if any of you all have questions for Amy while I'm pulling mine up, please feel free to put those in the chat. And Amy will stay on. So if something comes to you sooner or in a little bit, then she can answer it later as well. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And I mean this to the staff as well. Amy and I'm sure hopefully by now you've gotten the understanding that we're really grateful and happy to partner with UNC School of the Arts. So I know I really like to emphasize that, of course, we're working in collaboration, but we don't work specifically for UNC School of the Arts. That's not our, we work independently, and we're grateful to be here. And I really do want to emphasize just how special it is when schools take time to be intentional about talking about these issues, and not in sort of this check the box kind of way, but like this really thoughtful, looking at sort of all the different folks who are on campus, including parents and caregivers. So I hope that just even this existing is a reflection of how much the university cares and wants your students to be safe and to feel okay being here. It looks like we do have a question, so I will pause. It says, how are cyberbullying or related misuse of tech social media addressed? Oh, that would not be my area, so I will pass that on to, I don't know if it's Nick or Amy or, yeah.
I'll just say real quick before Nick maybe takes over that if the issue had some type of relationship to being mistreated because of sex, then the Title IX officer would be involved as part of a larger process through student conduct. So maybe Nick or whoever else is up next, feel free.
Yeah, unfortunately, cyberbullying and bullying in general can be issues that happen. We do address them. You'll learn more about how our student code of conduct works later on during orientation sessions. So I won't get too much into it, but it generally is a fairly serious infraction here. It can result in a student being placed on probation, and multiple instances of it can even result in a student suspension. So it is something we take seriously. And cyberbullying, we work closely with our campus police, and we've even gotten warrants to investigate who's behind certain acts of cyberbullying if they rise to a certain threshold. So just a quick warning, you can't hide behind a digital footprint. Everyone leaves behind fingerprints everywhere. So we do treat it seriously. We investigate it. We do our due diligence. And usually we'll ask the student and put them in the driver's seat of, hey, how do you want this handled? Because there are different ways to handle cyberbullying, and the student gets to be in the driver's seat.
Thank you for the question, and definitely keep putting them in the Q&A as others come up. Very brief introduction about myself, and then I will tell you more about sort of all the work that in a summary form of what I do with your students. And we'll sort of end with activities. We'll do a couple activities together, and then sort of think about some ways in which perhaps you can be available to support your students. I'm certainly know you all are, but maybe some tips and ideas of sort of some red flags to consider. Really briefly, I do, like Amy, introduce yourself. I think it's always important to know who is here. And particularly, I do get to spend a lot of time with your students. I mean, considering I'm not an employee and I'm not, on their like teacher or professor throughout the year. I do get to do 2 sessions, which with each grade for about an hour and 15 minutes. So it's 2.5 hours, and we're getting really into, some difficult things. And so I do find that I form a pretty good connection pretty quickly with your students. So I just want you to know a little bit about me, as it might come up that they've spoken with me. This is my family. I'm actually in France right now, so hopefully the internet is okay. This was at the top photo, the beach pictures was us yesterday. That's my parents and my sister, but I do have a student who just finished his freshman year in high school. We live in Raleigh. And then I have another son, Sky, who just finished 6th grade. And so, it's always a strange thing to finally be at the same place, as I've been doing these types of workshops forever. And I'm like, wow, now my kids are the same age as many of yours. This is work that I care very deeply about. Very briefly, my history has always been working at rape crisis centers or on college campuses as the advocates for students. So while Amy, comes from this sort of the legal perspective, we've worked together for a really long time in this beautiful way in which she's this great expert on compliance And then we mesh really well I kind of come from that trauma informed, really looking at the survivors and the experiences that the students would have, and making sure that they're being treated properly and that they're getting all of the resources that they need. And Amy and I really come from the same philosophy, which is not always the case. So I'm really grateful to have, someone in that role who also really understands, the needs of survivors while also being in compliance with federal laws and regulations. So a little bit about me. These are some of the campuses that I have spent many years on. I was at the NC State University Women's Center for many years as the advocate there. I was the advocate at UNC Chapel Hill, and then also at University of South Carolina. I left about 12 years ago just to do the same thing, but to be able to sort of be at different schools and campuses. One of the first jobs I got in my organization, Chrysalis Network, was to work at St. Mary's School, which is an all-girls boarding school in Raleigh. And I still teach there about 30 courses a year, also almost identical to what I do with your students. And so that's been really lovely to sort of have. I work with them, then I work with your students, and in the end, they're essentially dealing with the same issues no matter where they are. So it's always really helpful to be with different communities. I also work part-time for the North Carolina Department of Justice as a sexual assault victim policy strategist. And I'm also a survivor of sexual violence while in college. And so I do share that with some of the students, usually 11th and 12th grade. And sometimes if it comes up, it's part of, the work that I do, but sometimes that's a good way to connect with students who might, not have spoken or shared about their experiences before. All right, enough about me. I just want to emphasize that, this is a short time, maybe 25 minutes that we're talking about these issues. And I know that for Amy and I, these conversations are sort of like what we're used to and are regular, but they're very heavy. And, this is sort of the way that we approach the work as well, is to not just hop into these really difficult topics. As a sort of facilitator, when I'm with your students, I always have fidget toys for them. I do have activities for them, whether it's just individual or group work, or we, share all together to make it feel as safe as possible. And so part of that is always sort of having these disclaimers to please take care of themselves. There's always someone from the counseling center that is available outside the door when I do a workshop in case a student might need to leave and want someone to speak with. But then I also stay after in case a student wants to share as well. So all of these sort of taking care of yourself, ideas are very much emphasized, and we can always give folks the content later. So I want to share that with you as well, that some of these things might be something you hadn't really thought about and can be difficult, not just thinking about for your students, but also for yourselves. The reason that we talk about this, and I know, certainly UNC School of the Arts is a special place in which there's the university, college and university students, and then also the high school. And I think we oftentimes think of this, sexual violence prevention work and dating violence prevention work being really specific to colleges. But we know that the vast majority of folks who experience sexual violence in particular experience it before the age of even getting to college. There's all kinds of data. I know this one's from 2015. This is because it's a national study that's done every 10 years, but we're still seeing the numbers about the same. It's about 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience some form of sexual assault before turning age 18. Some of that is physical contact, and some of that is being shown inappropriate, videos or images. So it's sort of all different forms of sexual abuse. But the numbers, as we can see, are really high. And so oftentimes, when kids come to high school, it might be the first time that they are sort of away from a place in which they maybe were experiencing sexual abuse, or away from the person that was harming them. And this could be a place for them to disclose. It's also, there's the dating violence part, which we'll talk about in a moment, that's also really very prevalent in this age group. And most of the time, as we see, it's by someone that they, know, love, or trust. A little bit more detail when we're looking, this is sort of national data when you're doing sort of a snapshot of like how many people experience dating violence that are in high school, in the past year, for example. And when I want to tell you, I show these numbers to your students. I don't spend a lot of time with statistics, but some things are important. And when I show them this, to me are startling, and I do this work, it's all the time. Over one in 4 experience some type of cyber dating abuse, so online. 1 in 3 physical dating violence. Also want to emphasize this is in all relationships, LGBTQI relationships, so same sex, trans folks, heterosexual relationships. They really are not finding differences in the rates. Psychological dating abuse is almost 50%. Sexual coercion, which is a form of rape, is 13%. And then on top of all this, only about a third tell somebody. And so when we look at all this data together, it's really about helping them understand, their rights and their boundaries and their physical space and also their resources, and helping them feel like there are folks who are there for them and who will be safe for them to tell. And as I'm talking, please, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. A little bit sort of more detail when we go deeper into the physical dating abuse part, we find that violent behavior typically begins between the ages of 12 and 18. So again, that high school age, and that girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of intimate partner violence. So again, that's violence within a dating relationship, which is almost triple the national average of other ages. And again, 2/3 of these survivors stay silent. So when we look to sort of think about age appropriate workshops for your students, and knowing that this is certainly a crisis, that transcends all, states, all, colleges, high schools, there's really, very few factors that we're seeing that can change that. We really want to look at sort of building upon each year ways to engage the students and to feel connected. And so, as I mentioned, with 9th, 10th grade, we do a part 1 and part 2. So this is just a quick breakdown. We don't have to go through all of this, but I'm happy to share these slides if you want to look more detail. And again, always happy to talk about this. 9th graders, we really focus the part 1 on just building healthy friendships. And I think particularly for the UNC School of the Arts students, that is something that they're struggling with, because most of them are not from Winston-Salem. They don't necessarily know anybody. And so they have these connections from wherever they, are coming from. And it can be hard to make new friends. So it's a good way to start thinking about our values and what are important characteristics for students and what they look for in friendships. And then part 2 is really sort of, taking those same ideas and thinking about dating relationships. In all of the workshops I do, I always emphasize that this is never to assume that anyone is dating, anybody wants to date, or that anyone hasn't dated. I think it's really important, to recognize that it's truly for everybody. You are certainly going to be friends with someone who is going to date someone. So even if you don't feel like it applies to you, or it's not something that you're thinking about, a lot of it is about helping recognize potential problems your friends might be having, or thinking in the future of ways to be, to help yourself. So we really do the normalizing about just intimacy and dating in general. We talk about digital safety. Last year I added new parts. Some of that was from my own, I had my son's friend was dealing with this whole crisis of how to break up with someone. And I thought, it's really good content. I don't know that most adults know how to break up with people. So certainly it's hard for high school students to do that in a way that feels safe. And so we've added the, how to break up with people, but also, am I even ready to date? Why am I even thinking about this? Is it because you feel like you should be, or do you want to? All of those types of things. And then we do some sort of real basics on consent, and then how to help a friend. So that's really sort of 9th grade. 10th grade is essentially a quick sort of revisit of the 9th grade elements. Sometimes there's folks who aren't here in 9th grade who are just coming in 10th grade. So we want to make sure they get some of that foundation. And we spend a lot of time again on sort of what does a healthy relationship look like? Because sometimes it's easier to really think about all the bad ones, you know, and the bad parts of relationships, but it's really most important in truth to identify what you want and what is healthy and what feels good. And so we spend a lot more time, and again, all of this is interactive and through activities, watching video clips, and I'll show you a couple examples of some of the things that we do. I'm going to pause for a moment. Any questions, comments so far? Okay. Well, after part one, for every single section, I always have index cards on in front of everybody, and I ask them to write a question, even if they don't have a question, to just write something, because we always want folks to feel anonymous and safe. But if there's sort of an anonymous question or a lingering question you have, to submit that, and I'll collect it, and then I'll do my best to answer those questions in part two. And this is always, you know, to me, it's most important, I think, to UNC School of the Arts as well, is that what we're teaching is the content that's relevant and feels relevant and important for the students. And these are always just such powerful, thoughtful, and sometimes really painful moments, because, you know, sometimes it's folks disclosing and wanting to know how to get help. But sometimes it's a lot of this, like, I don't even think I want to date, but I feel like I should date. Like, why should I date? Right. So it's really practical questions. And so part two, even though I sort of have this agenda, I usually spend the beginning making sure that we're answering the questions that they asked in part one. All right, so a couple examples and sort of key concepts. Some of the things that we talk about is this idea of love bombing. A lot of the students are familiar with this term, where, you know, they might start dating someone that is just sort of, you know, I think the love bombing words and the image really sort of go together, is that they just sort of overwhelm, overdo, take over their partner, shower them with gifts and all of these things to sort of build this trust with their partner. But really, it's sort of, it over time becomes this really volatile experience for one of the students, because of the sort of feeling of control that that partner has taken over them. I see a question. Are older high school students given opportunity to attend any of these workshops? My senior will be new. Yes, I know. Thank you for asking that question. That is a tricky one, because, you know, we like to build, but I do think, especially with 11th and 12th, I know that some of those programs were not offered in 9th and 10th. And so we do our best to pull back and kind of do some of those basics, particularly with like consent, which I think is just, you know, the most central of the topics. And then also some of the dating, digital dating, signs of dating abuse in that way. So we definitely summarize some. We don't go through the entire workshop, but I think we're always open to ideas on maybe sharing that information, because I certainly appreciate the question. I also have a lot of resources. So if they didn't receive that information, or if you all want to look more into it, I'm going to paste some of my favorite resources in the chat as well, to help guide them if you have ways to do that with them as well. So love bombing, as I mentioned, that comes up a lot. We also do things like an activity where I'll have them sort of stand up. I'll, you know, if they're able, I'll put this on the screen, and then we'll just pretend the room is sort of a spectrum. And if you think this is like totally fine green, you go to one side. If you think this is red, you go to another side. If you think like in some cases it's okay, you go to the middle. And folks, you know, we do several and we kind of build up to trickier ones. But here's an example of one. We have really good discussions about when or is this okay? If you know, if one partner says, if you don't have anything to hide, what's the big deal in terms of sharing their passcode? So again, just to give you an idea of the way that we sort of spend some time thinking through these. And then particularly with the 10th and the 11th graders, and 12th, we talk more about coercion, which is really the most common form of quote unquote technique in which folks experience sexual abuse, and particularly in dating relationships. So that is something that we will sort of parse out and spend more time on. Number one, you know, sort of message to them is to listen to themselves. You know, when people are in healthy and safe relationships, they don't feel scared or question their safety. And so a lot of this is sort of empowering the students to listen to themselves, and that's whether it's to them or if they're a friend and they feel like something doesn't feel right with their family member or their own friend, right? And so it's like helping to sort of validate their thoughts and experiences as well. Briefly, 11th and 12th grade just kind of picks back up on those. We still do the same, submit your questions after part 1. So the activities on the left for 11th and 12th graders, we spend a lot of time. And I think I actually just do one long session with 11th and 12th, not a part 1. But over time, I've sort of figured out some of the questions they like to ask. But here we get more details, particularly on how to be supportive to friends. We do some work on the prevention side of sexual violence, and then really much deeper into consent as well, and activities around sexual exploitations, for example, nude pictures. I think that's something that comes up a lot, and the request for those, and just how to manage, and who do we often blame in those situations and who's really at fault. So we have really good discussions there. What's on the right is what Amy does, just a summary with the 9th and 11th graders, and she was really strategic, and essentially Title IX is the same, so it's not necessarily new, but she wanted to make sure that all incoming students in 9th grade receive this, and then maybe they forget, so they'll get it again 11th grade, and maybe there's a way to also provide that information for new 12th graders. Now that you've mentioned that about your senior, I'm sure we'll come up with something for that. Anything to add there, Amy? Okay. Great. All right, so a couple examples for how we talk about consent, for example, is I will do sort of a red, yellow, green at your table, because I, make sure they're sort of together. I'll put up this example. Do you think this is red, yellow, or green if both partners lean in for a kiss? And so we'll have most people will just always say green, this thing's fine because both partners are leaning in, but it does get us to start thinking, well, is there any situation you can think of where perhaps this could be yellow or even red? And so sort of thinking outside of the context, well, yeah, what if one of the partners just physically assaulted the other partner? And then it was sort of understood that they better lean in for a kiss, right? Is there other factors, other circumstances sort of involved in that situation? So that's just sort of one example, and we build on those as well. We also are very clear on just focusing on whether it's no through words or actions, that no is a complete sentence, doesn't require justification. And really my approach with this work is, certainly like rights for each individual, but it's also like, often in our culture, we're taught like no means no, and putting the responsibility on the folks to say that. But it's also about like, don't assume you have a yes until you have a yes, right? That we all need to learn to receive rejection, that we need to, know that everyone has the right to do that, and that doesn't mean convince me, like this is a no, whether it's with body language or with words. And we talk about examples of that as well. Questions, thoughts? All right, so I wanted to do one brief activity with you all just to give you a sense of the additional way that we think about these things, and then we'll end with some quick sort of tips and then also a little video. All right, so one of the activities I do, and I always say just to start, this is very much rooted in the gender binary. In other words, I'm asking, what do we think about what men do versus women? But all of my workshops are very inclusive, and whether it's through data or activities, and thinking about how does this impact trans folks, non-binary folks, and same-sex couples. And so sometimes we just have activities like this to think about sort of the messages we've received and how those are ingrained for us. So in the chat, if you could, this is just one way to start thinking about this work. And if you were on, and we'll just pick like NC State University's campus, and you went up to a male identified person, whatever that looks like. And of course, there's always exceptions, but for the sake of this activity, let's say, just kind of a classic male identified person on campus, and you ask them, what do you do on a daily basis to prevent yourself from being raped? What do you think they would say? So we'll start with that first question. So please type in the chat. Any ideas you
Yeah, I'm not sure the chat function is turned on. Is that right? So maybe type in the question and answer.
It's the Q&A.
Oh,
Mhm.
right.
It's in the
Yes.
Q&A.
Thank you for that reminder. Thank you. Okay, so we're just gonna fill up that Q&A if you could do that. Okay, so we have. All right, so we have nothing and nothing. Give it a few more seconds. Of course, they might laugh. Yep, I think that's certainly. Okay, you might have someone say, be aware of their surroundings. We also, maybe men don't really think about it. And again, of course, there's always exceptions. We already saw the data around how many male identified people do experience sexual abuse. But I think you're getting the gist of this, right? And again, this is a sort of fast forwarded version. But in general, when we think about what they do on a daily basis, particularly for folks who haven't experienced sexual violence, they probably laugh, say nothing. Some might say be aware of surroundings. Oftentimes, between that and maybe going to the gym, it's really more about to protect themselves from a physical attack, which of course is not okay. And we don't want that to happen. At the same time, there's a big difference between the fear of experiencing a sexual assault and rape versus a physical attack. So for the purposes of this activity, if we're all sort of on the same page, probably for the vast majority of male identified, high school, college students, they're like, don't really know what you're talking about. It's not something that they think about on a daily basis. So let's switch gears and think of that same question, but think about women and girls. What kinds of answers do you think we would get there? All right, so we have walk in groups. We have carry mace or pepper spray. Women might say watch surroundings, carry pepper spray, walk in pairs, groups, never leave a drink unsupervised or unattended, never walk alone at night, careful when walking at night, choose a transportation method. Don't walk alone in many places, avoid dark parking lots, right? We can go, and please feel free to hop in. We can go on and on and on and on. And just so you know, I do the same activity with the faculty and staff at UNCSA as well. So we can go on and on and on. And what we find is, even these examples, park in well-lit places, hyper awareness about surroundings, let someone know where you are at all times. We have all these apps for this, right? You can check on people. I was tracking my parents last night. They disappeared. I was like, where did you go? But we can do that with our kids. You can do it with your friends, right? And the bottom line is when we look at sort of what these sort of traditional prevention kinds of messages are, they're very much geared towards a stranger harming us, right? So like, don't walk alone, make sure you tell people, carry pepper spray. And it's not that stranger assault doesn't happen, but as noted before, the vast majority are, from the person they're dating, somebody that they know, love, and trust. And so when we think about prevention, what we can do as a community, it's really important to sort of think about, are our messages really accurate? Are they helpful? Or is this not necessarily helping? So really briefly, a couple examples is, this is really what a rape culture is when we live in a community in which for the vast majority of male identified folks, it's not something that they're having to think about or make accommodations for. And then for the vast majority of women and girls, it is something that we're thinking about from the moment we park our cars to, wake up in the morning and pick our clothes, even though those are not the reasons that people assault. And we know it's about power and control, but this is really the vast majority of our efforts are really focused on doing anything we can to prevent it from happening. We know that about 98% of women who experience sexual abuse or assault experience it by men. And we know that male survivors, about 93% experience it from men. 93% of child sex abuse cases, they know the person. 90% of college survivors also know the person. About 1 in 10 men are raped. And so this is really just an activity, guys, thinking about the messaging we have around sort of sexual violence. is sort of all over the place. And this list, if we kept going and if we wrote this down, I think nothing is new here, right? This is sort of like the list that we might have told our kids when they go to school. It's the list that, our parents told us. And this is sort of my little chart here. But in theory, we could think, well, if these things worked, right? If like carrying pepper spray and not walking alone and not wearing short skirts or whatever the list is, did work, then the rates of rape would go down and would have over time, because we all know these things. Nothing here is new. But what we're finding is that there's no data that is telling us that. And in fact, it's really telling us the opposite, that the numbers are continuing to increase or stay the same. And, these are just, some data to sort of back that up. But this is what we're seeing, is that on college campuses and high schools, these numbers continue to go up because we're not getting at the root of the problem, right? That these are things that we're continuing to sort of operate as if, particularly women and girls need to do all these things for it to not happen. And then we're not holding the harm doers accountable. And again, we know certainly women and girls are also perpetrators of this violence. And so that's really the model that I take in the work that we do. When we think about like the list, if we had listed all these things out like we do in the workshop, it's sort of, when you kind of look at that list that we've mentioned, this is actually our victim blaming checklist. We might hear about something in the news, so-and-so was abused or sexually assaulted or raped. And then at the end, it's like, prevention tips. And it's like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, and don't do that. And this is sort of a cycle that we can't get out of. And I recognize as parents or caregivers, is very hard. And you may have very well told your children this. And of course, it's understandable. Please don't park here. Don't get gas at this time. Don't wear that. Don't, go to this place. Don't walk alone at night. At the same time, and this is sort of my tips for families, if something does happen to your student, it's oftentimes these messages that they remember the most. And in other words, it makes it really hard for them to come back and tell you. And so I'm going to share sort of more about that. But a lot of the work I've done on campuses is kids who are just wonderful and love their parents so much and want to tell them so much, but they just think like, when I went to school, they told me, don't go out, don't have a drink, don't do this. And, my partner assaulted me and we were out earlier that night, and I just don't want them to blame me for it. That makes sense. Looks like we have a question. In a nutshell, is there 2 or 3 major suggestions other than establishing boundaries you help girls or others do to prevent dating on party instances? I don't think I know what you mean by prevent dating on party instances. Could you please? I'm happy to share, but dating or party. Okay, boundaries that you help people with to prevent dating or party instances. So meaning potentially like some tips to establish boundaries if they're out or they're dating, to sort of, I think that's probably what you're saying. So yeah, I think some of it is it's simple and not simple, because I think it goes to the point of like recognizing what feels right and doesn't feel right. And the hard part I have, and this is what we talk about, is that I think we focus so much on like taking care of ourselves, rather than, I think the reason that rape happens at a party is because there's a rapist there. So I don't mean that flippantly, but it's like, what can we do to get them out? Because they're the problem. And so it's sort of like, of course, addressing like feeling safe in your surroundings and having a buddy system, meaning like, if you go out, you make sure you have people sort of taking care of each other and watching each other. You have, who's going to check in. All of those sort of elements really matter. At the same time, we have to go to the next level of also like, if you see a person behaving in an inappropriate way, or a sketchy dude, or whatever sort of language we use, we can't laugh it off. We have to stop inviting these people to the party. We have to hold people accountable, right, as a community. And so we sort of, I don't know if that is helpful, but for sure we talk about, how to look out for your friends and feeling your instincts and, all those different things. But also, what can we do as a community to be thinking more about that? Hopefully that makes sense. So I know we just have a couple more minutes and I'm happy to talk about this. And I also want to apologize because I'm in France and the France Euro Cup. The France game is starting. My mom is downstairs screaming the French national anthem when she should know better that I'm doing this. So sorry if you hear her. I am going to just fast forward because I want to make sure that you all get this and I will share these slides. But I think, and again, happy to talk more about that. And I'm going to pop in the chat right now a list of resources because I want you all to have these. They can see the chat, right? They just can't type in the chat. Is that correct? No, that says hosts and panelists. Okay, I got it here. Here's to everyone. Does that now, can everybody see those? I think you can see those.
Wait.
So, oh yes, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, we have someone who can help make sure it gets disseminated.
Thank you. And it looks like Aaron said that they can see it. So these are just some red flags that I want you, as family members to sort of consider because it can be hard, as we saw, for folks to disclose. So if you see sun and moons, and of course this is hard to, like sort of parse out because you also have a teenager. So some of these things are naturally how they are, but you also know your student the most. And if you feel like something is off, sudden mood swings, insecurities, withdrawals, unexplained sleep problems, all of a sudden having fear of certain people or places, they exhibit knowledge of very adult sexual behaviors and language that just doesn't line up. If you see changes in the body, like not wanting to be hugged or touched, or changes in eating, more alcohol and drug use, or drug and alcohol use, find themselves, to be dirty or bad, stops caring about their appearance, or they start sort of engaging in some antisocial behaviors like lying. Those could be red flags that something is going on. And it's just an opportunity to check in with your student. These are some of the things that I sort of mentioned earlier. But this idea of like tips to be open to your child doesn't mean, I know it's hard to not give them that list of things that you want to give them, and that's okay. But please also remember, if you're going to tell your student, like, please lock your doors and, park here and be careful and be out with a friend, also add but if anything ever happens to you, please know it is never your fault and I am always here for you. It is just that little piece that can make all the difference. I was doing a training with the employees at UNC School of the Arts, and this dad was initially talking about how he's like the girl dad and all of the daughters come and they bring all their friends, and he's always like, I'm going to handle it if anything happens to you. And he's like, I didn't realize until this workshop that probably if anything happened to them, I would not be the one that they would tell, because they're going to be afraid that I'm going to harm that person, or they're going to think that I'm going to say, well, why didn't you do this or that? And so again, even though it comes from the right place, ultimately we want them to feel safe. So another reason over time that we've heard is kids are afraid if one of their parents is a survivor, they don't want to make them feel sad. They are uncomfortable if their parents are generally uncomfortable talking about, assault or even just body parts, sex, that might be really difficult for them to disclose to you. Or if their parent threatens to kill the perpetrator, this can also be a reason that a student wouldn't tell. So some tips for this, and then the last pages, just resources. Like I said, just think about saying, no matter what, I'm here for you. I believe you. Always the perpetrator's fault, never yours. You never have to worry about me harming the person who hurt you, and just pay attention, check in, and ask your student. I'm going to give you a link to this video, which is a really good resource. And then these are the resources that I recommend, and it is 3 o'clock, and I appreciate your time, and I'm here for other questions. And thank you for sharing your students with us.
Parents, guardians, families, we thank you for your time today. And we thank all of the panelists, as well as Juliet and Amy, for sharing this important information that will also be shared with your young persons when they are here on campus. Please feel free to send us any information or questions that you might have as you go forward. And we thank you again for your time today.